Even if you paid no attention to the Tokyo Olympics, you're bound to have caught the drama regarding Simone Biles' mental health. Tennis champion Naomi Osaka also withdrew from major events, citing a similar ongoing battle with her psychological well-being. So what does this say about the pressures facing sportsmen and women? And what on earth has any of this got to do with your business? Well, apparently, quite a lot. Hi, Brent. Hi, Heidi. Welcome to podcast number 10.
Yeah, we made it all the way to 10.
Yeah, we're into double digits.
Yes.
Wow.
So going back to the opener there, it's an interesting data point. What are we seeing here?
I think that it's just fascinating to look at these major sporting tournaments, which are in billions of dollars, and I would say no one put money on the topic and the theme of the summer being mental health in professional or semi-professional athletes.
I think it's showing us that it's not just that mental health has become important, it's always been important. It's that it's becoming highlighted and important to a generation differently than it has to generations prior. You can look at also the veteran suicide issues going on in all countries, coming out of being in war for 20 years. Professional athletes finally saying, my mental health matters. So we're going to see that start to trickle down into what employees and what organizations are going to have to do to respond to this.
So are we tragically seeing amongst vets an increase in suicides?
Yes.
There has been, for the last couple of years, it has been accelerating. There are multiple reasons that are put to it.
Right.
And we could get into those, but that'll take a whole lot more than 10 minutes on a podcast.
Of course.
But one of the challenges that continues to keep coming up is there are not enough resources available for students in school, college students, professional athletes, for soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines. There's just not enough resources, and there's still a stigma around going to get those resources and ask for help.
So what we're saying is war has always been nasty and a terrible thing and the last resort, and or should be. Sport is no tougher now than it was 10, 20 years ago. We're talking about a generational difference. Is that what we're saying?
I think that this summer in sports really illustrated in large neon letters a seismic difference between the expectations of younger people for how they will be treated and how their mental health is respected, and people not that much older. It was not that long ago where you would have never discussed mental health, you would have never discussed anxiety issues, and people on the levers of power are really going to have to start listening to it. That's the big change I see illustrated by this summer of sport.
I think part of this has always been, especially in professional athletes, a fear of their sponsors are going to step away from them if they say they're having mental health issues and they need to take a break because they're stressed out or whatever that is. I think there's always been a fear that the sponsors are going to go, "Ooh, mental health, we don't want to be associated with that." That perception is changing now.
I certainly hope so. It's certainly changed over the last 50 years or so, and I think it needs to go a little bit further. There was a lot of negative comments online, and being devil's advocate, there was a lot of comments along the lines of, well, these kids just aren't as tough as they used to be.
That sounds like the classic walking uphill to school in both directions.
Right, yes.
It's the same excuse of, well, I took it, why shouldn't you? Well, hazing in public schools is no longer allowed anymore. We change our standards as we learn to be better. So claiming, I put up with this, why don't you, seems like a pretty futile argument. And we frequently talk about wanting to be on the right side of history. And I would hope if people took something out of this summer, looking at this question of mental health and looking at their own businesses and organizations, It's the question of, are you on the right side of history?
Right.
It's a terrible argument, and it's a moot point because these things have always happened. What hasn't happened in the past is we didn't have the ability to have social media and have information at our fingertips. Because you can go back to World War I and shell shock. Shell shock was what is now called PTSD. And there were people doing bad things to their spouses, to their family, to themselves, but no one actually ever got to know about it. You can move on to the Vietnam era, and you had a lot of people that came back with a lot of issues, same as we're dealing with now. But the information wasn't so freely shared. And I think that's what's shifting this conversation, is that openness of information and people being willing to share. I'm having this issue. I want help. Where can I go get help?
Right. And I think there's, again, it's an ongoing problem with social media. You know, one comment can have an incredibly long-lasting negative effect, almost, a life-changing effect on people. Bringing this back to employers, and what do we need to consider moving forward with employment?
I find it really interesting, the resistance that you find in older hiring managers or older generations with the paradigm of, I walked uphill to school in both directions, why shouldn't you? We point with clients to some of these changes in the expectations, and we make the choice very open to them. Do you want the best and the brightest? Do you want young, innovative staff? Then you need to shift your expectations.
Right.
It's been a market with advantages for those hiring for so long. And this is if you're talking about wages, if you're talking about benefits, if you're talking about work culture. There's a rude awakening coming for organizations where if people have a choice, they won't choose you. So you now have to make yourself attractive to those people seeking work.
I know for a fact, having spoken to a school counsellor, how busy they have been helping children adjust post-COVID, it's not quite over yet, but, you know, helping children get back into the routine of being back at school. I mean, these people have been invaluable. And we all know HR exists in large corporations and large companies. Is that service something that even the smallest of companies should at least perhaps freelance in, or?
I think there have always been systems in place. They were not readily talked about or accessible as the employee assistance program was around. I think there are services that are going to become more forefront in the future. I know when I went to school, and probably when all of us went to school, there were no mental health professionals in our schools or even available to us, no matter how stressful school was.
Right. No, nor mine. No.
Believe me, I could have used one sometimes. It got pretty stressful.
And I think I would leave listeners with an interesting thought, which is certainly HR is the front line of hiring, but where the actual change in thinking needs to occur is at the leadership level around what type of culture do we have. And that's then enacted through HR. To look at that school counselor, that's certainly the front line of support, but within schools, you need a school configured for a culture of acceptance and learning and change.
Right.
Which is interesting, because this really drives us into our next podcast, and why do we so often solve problems with the wrong solution?
Well, Heidi and Brent, thank you very much. I mean, the more we can talk about mental health, the better it will be, absolutely. Well, I look forward to speaking to you next week, and thank you everyone for listening.
All right, talk to you then.